friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And today I thought I'd talk a little bit about the squash that I grew this year, some failures and successes, and my favorite ones that I'll definitely be growing again next year. So now you've probably already watched some videos where I mentioned this one here and these little Pippin acorn squashes, and I really like these ones. I love the color that they turn, and I love the fact that they ripen early. I didn't get a whole lot of these, but I was also, that kind of applies to any of the squash because I was sampling a whole bunch of different ones at once. Now, the two that I did try to grow that did nothing for me were the striped cushaw and the Cherokee tan pumpkin. I got plants, but the plants never were very healthy, never even got a single flower on them. So probably not the best choice for here. The Cherokee tan pumpkin squash seed that I actually got from Danny and Wanda from Deep South Homestead. So they're in the Deep South, and I don't blame them for the seed. I blame the fact that it's coming from a completely different climate. And it's possible that I could try again, and if I could eventually get some kind of fruit off of there, I would be able to save the seeds and then, you know, try to get it more acclimated. That's how if you really want something, you really want to try it, you just have to keep trying until you can get at least one healthy fruit, save the seeds from that, and then try it again next year. But you really only want to do that if you've got a lot of space and you don't have to worry about cross-pollination with certain other squash, because you don't want to end up with mutt squash seed. And because of that, I won't be saving any of the seeds from any of the squash that I grew this year, other than the zucchini, especially since it was also out front, because I just don't want to end up with any mutt seeds. You know, sometimes they can make some really good squash and sometimes they don't. It just really depends. And again, I love the size and I love the color. I actually prefer smaller size squash. So same thing with these particular butternut. I like the fact that these butternut squash are a lot smaller than the ones I've grown in the past. Now, as always seems the case with butternut squash around here, it takes really, really long for it to start to get its color. Now, these are supposed to be orange on the outside. And I was leaving them and leaving them and leaving them, thinking, great, these are never going to fully ripen. But finally, I picked one and noticed that where the stem broke off, it was a nice orange in there. And so I decided to go ahead and take one of the tiny ones. This is actually the smallest one right here, but in the one I cut was a little bit bigger than that, and cut it open. And sure enough, as soon as I cut into it, I knew it was ripe. And I actually took half of that and ate the whole thing raw because it was so good right off the plant. I've never felt that way about any kind of butternut or other type of squash where I just took a piece of it raw and I was like, wow, this is super good just like that. No cooking required. It was delicious raw. And then I did go ahead and cook up that plus another whole squash for dinner later that night and loved it. So good. A little butter, a little salt. And then the next day I had some left over, so I took that and added a little bit of maple syrup to it. You know, nix the salt, little butter, little maple syrup, and boy, that was really good too. So if you like it sweet or you like it savory, the orange butternut is definitely a great squash. Now, since I brought them inside because I knew they were ripe. I realized they were actually ripe, and I'm worried about them freezing out there because we've been getting some freezes at night. And so, but since I brought them in, I can see that the color is starting to turn. I don't know if that's showing up well in the picture there, but you can start to see some of the color as opposed to, like, if you look at it compared to this really dark green right here. And a lot of these scars you see on there, that's because some of them were a little too low, like, oh, look at that. That's chickens. And they were still getting at them, even though I kept trying to get them high enough and on the other side of the cattle panel so they couldn't get to them. But anyway, I got the most off of these, and we've already eaten, what, 2 or 3 of them. And it's still not a ton. But again, I was sampling. Now, if all of the squash would have produced well for me, I would have a lot of squash. And on top of that, I'm not super worried about it because I still have a lot of pumpkin put away from, I think, maybe it was 2015 that I grew a whole bunch of sugar pie pumpkin, which that is my favorite pumpkin so far to grow. I love that one. It's a small little pumpkin. It does very well for us. I've got a couple pictures here so you can see what that one looks like. So if you're looking for a pumpkin that you know is going to grow well, especially in a more northern, cooler, maybe even wetter climate like ours, I recommend going with the sugar pie pumpkin. And eventually I'll be growing those again. But the thing I'm liking about this orange butternut squash is that it has the aroma and tastes very similar to pumpkin anyway. This would be really, really good in a pumpkin pie or any pumpkin type related thing, like the pumpkin dip I was talking about in my last video, where I did the creamsicles, the pumpkin creamsicles. These would be good, as would these acorn squash here. This is that pumpkin that maybe some of you have figured out for sure the name of this one. And one of these days I got to talk to my neighbor. It's just a matter of, seeing them and saying, hey, what's the name of that squash again? But again, several people said this was Blue Hubbard. And then another lady said she didn't think this was a Blue Hubbard because she grows Blue Hubbard, and she said it was a little different. But either way, I really liked the squash. I only got 2 of them off of my plants, but this right here is enough to feed us for a very long time. And I don't need any more pumpkin pie mixtures because that year I grew a lot of pumpkin. I packaged it up in 2-cup packages, so each package would be enough to make pie. And every year for Thanksgiving, I make pumpkin pies, and I still have tons of pumpkin left because then I grew more another year. Spaghetti squash is also another really good one that does really well for us. I just decided not to grow it this year because I wanted to try all this other squash, and my space was limited for plants. But anyway, this one did well, and I'm really happy with the aroma, with the flavor, with the way it grew. But because I like color, I would, if I'm going to go back to any kind of pumpkin, it's going to be the sugar pie pumpkin because it gets that nice orange color. And what I like to do, and this would still look good sitting, especially if by Thanksgiving the rest of these guys turn orange, because I'm just going to put them back in cold storage. And hopefully by then these will be orange like these. And so what I like to do with my squash is leave them through Thanksgiving, at least a few of them, so I can use them as decor. And then after that I will cut them up. This is why squash is so great, because it lasts for such a long time without having to be refrigerated. As long as you keep it in a cool storage area, whether it be a root cellar or anything. We keep it in our back pantry where I put all my canned goods, which used to be our oldest son's bedroom. That's where, and I have a video where I show a little bit of that if you're interested on our pantry. I don't show the whole thing, but I do show parts of it, and so you can check that video out up here. And oh yes, don't forget, I do also put links down below to make it easier for people who don't like to use the iCards. But yeah, you can just stick them back in cold storage, and then whenever you're ready for them. That's what I do with my spaghetti squash last year. I had a lot of spaghetti squash, and just one at a time would go and get one. And I did have one end up going bad on me, but I think there was something, it might have already had a bad spot on it anyway. It might not have been a great squash to begin with, but all the rest of them were totally fine, and they sat back there for months, and I just used them that way until I used them up. I didn't bother preserving them. Now, since I'm talking about pumpkin and squash, now I have yet to actually can any squash. I just haven't needed to at this point. But if you decide to can your squash, the best way to do it, the safest way to do it, you're going to want to pressure can it, unless you do the old-fashioned water bath method of 3 hours of boiling. But you don't want to puree it first. You want to cube it up and put it in your jars, and then put your water in there. If you puree it, you can't do it like they do in the stores, with the cans. Because if you puree it, there's still that concern that the heat cannot penetrate the thickness of that of the pumpkin puree itself. Now, why? And it's not an acidic thing like you would have, like maybe with an apple butter that you can water bath can easily enough, and it doesn't take long. But pumpkin is a totally different animal, and so you've got to, you really shouldn't try to can. They say it's just not safe to do it that way, to puree it and then can it. So anyway, just a little notes about canning. If you haven't canned squash yet and you're thinking about it, look into that, make sure that you know the difference, and make sure that you understand the difference between pressure canning and hot water bath and where it's needed and so on and so forth. I also recommend you check out my video where I talk about botulism and then canning versus vacuum sealing. It's all in one video, and the importance of understanding these things and where, you know, different types of canning, where it's used. And no, I'm not totally against the hot water bath method for meats and non-acidic foods, because it was done for many, many years. People still do it. I have more coming out on that. For me, I still choose to pressure can, because really when you're talking about non-acidic foods, it's really the safest way to go, just to be certain, but it's also quicker. So I don't have to let my propane run for 3 hours, or actually it would be like maybe 3.5 hours. I can let it run for about 1 hour and 45 minutes, because it takes about that long to get to that point where you let it vent, get it up to pressure, and then start your timer. And usually that's if you're doing quart-sized jars. It's typically going to be 90 minutes, 75 minutes for pint-sized jars. So, and that's usually pretty much the same all the way across the board. But always check your canning books when it comes to any of these vegetables and meats, just to be sure, because there'll be a few things that might be different, such as fish. Fish is the only meat I know of that takes longer. It needs a longer time for pressure canning than beef or chicken or pork or anything like that. So anyway, yeah, my recommendations, if you like a pumpkin, whatever this is, if we can for sure figure out the name of it, one of these days I'll do a follow-up so we can be sure. But this is a tasty, tasty pumpkin. I just like the nice, deeper, brighter fall colors of orange and yellow and gold and stuff like that. But it's still a beautiful squash. And then for flavor, definitely any of these three. The orange butternut, this is my favorite for flavor right here. I'm loving this guy. But all three of these are amazing. So I did try to find these seed on Baker Creek and couldn't find them. So for the lady that sent me the seeds, if you could send me a link to where I could purchase these myself, I would really appreciate it, because I would like to get some more of the seed for this, because like I said, I think I only have 1 or 2 seed left over, because I think I had to plant them again. Because here was the other deal. This year was a very, very slow year, and I know you guys have heard me say this before, but if you're new, you might not know this. We already have a short growing season as it is, but this year it was even shorter, because it took so long for the weather to finally get warm enough for things to really grow. And then instead of it, typically when that happens, that warmer weather gets extended out into the end of September. That didn't happen this year. And so I know that's why these didn't get a chance to fully turn orange. So if next year we have a longer, you know, a more normal type season, I think these would probably have a chance to get orange, and I would probably get more fruit off of them. But anyway, yeah, because of the weird weather, I had to do double plantings or even triple plantings. Some of them I started in the greenhouse, some of them I started outside, and then I had to go plant again because just nothing was happening. And some of the plants that I even started in the greenhouse that were doing good, once I moved them out into the main garden bed, they just kind of withered and didn't do great. So some of them, but some of them still did okay for me. So yeah, definitely these. All right, well that's it on the squash for me this year. And so next year I may not try any new squash. I may just focus on trying to get a lot of these two in particular that I really like. I don't think I'm gonna grow pumpkin next year, simply because I still have a lot frozen up in the freezer. Of course it's in the freezer, it's frozen, duh. Okay, hope you enjoyed this video and that you learned something new and maybe got some ideas for next year and some squash that you may wanna try. All right, thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.